natural, but please keep in mind the sources of international law and the sources of municipal law. Even they seems to be the same, but there are significant differences. Okay, they are the same, but there are small differences here and there, and the differences between them I will discuss. Definitely I will discuss. We will definitely have a comparison between sources of international law and sources of municipal law. Okay, so I will not be asking you what are the different sources of municipal law. I believe I am assuming that each and every one of you are very well aware of the different sources of municipal law. But then again, keeping in mind the different sources of municipal law, what is meant by sources of international law? Okay, that this is where the major difference begin. Okay, when we say sources of international law, there is a habit among academicians to equate sources of international law to the basis of international law. Okay, that it is a habit. Okay, so sources of international law, for many academicians and for many students, they assume that it is the basis of international law, but that is not the case. Okay, so rather than the basis of international law, the basis of international law we have already discussed. What are the basis of international law? Basis of international law we have discussed in the previous class when we discussed the different theories of international law. Okay, there are different theories of international law that we discussed in the previous class, which tries to explain the basis of international law. When we are discussing, when we are trying to articulate the basis of international law through those theories,
Sandeep sir,
I hope. Yeah, hello. Yes.
sir, ഒന്ന് രണ്ട് പേർക്ക് റിക്വസ്റ്റ് അക്സെപ്റ്റ് ആവുന്നുണ്ടെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു ഈ സെഷനിലേക്ക് കയറുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടുള്ള.
ഓക്കെ ഓക്കെ, 1 minute. ഞാൻ മാത്രമേ ഉള്ളൂ ഇപ്പൊ accept ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട്. That may be the case. I humbly request the students who have a laptop and access to the LJRF, the Gmail account, to log in using those account and try to admit candidates who are coming in. Okay, ഞാനിപ്പം ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നതെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ I am trying to admit students, but I believe when I am doing my presentation I may not be able to admit them when they come all together. ഒരാളായിട്ട് വരുന്നതിന് കുഴപ്പമില്ല. ഒന്നിൽ കൂടുതൽ ആൾക്കാർ ഒരുമിച്ച് വരികയാണെങ്കിൽ I have to manually admit. ആരെങ്കിലും those who have laptops or mobile phones, please try to log in using the LJRF Gmail account and try to admit the students. Okay, എനിക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ആരെങ്കിലും ഒരാളെ സഹായിക്കണം. എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ശ്രീദത്ത്, you can do it if you have already logged in, or you expect someone else.
Sir, ഇപ്പൊ നോക്കി.
Okay, Sridhar.
Okay.
Now, coming back to the class, so never equate sources of international law with the basis of international law. So, what is actually meant by sources of international law? What do you mean by sources of international law? In order to avoid that confusion, Herbert Briggs എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു an academician or a jurist, Herbert Briggs, in his literature, The Law of Nations, published in 1952, he tried to describe or define what is the sources of international law. Okay, so according to Herbert Briggs, sources of international law are methods or procedure by which the rules of international law are created or determined or identified. Okay, methods or procedure by which the rules of international law are created, or determined or identified. Either you create an international law or you discover international law. So sources of international law are the method or procedure by which you try to create international law or legislate international law, or try to discover international law that exists universally, omnipotent, omnipresent. Okay, that we have discussed in the previous class. When I am trying to tell you that it is a method or procedure through which rules of international law is created, what should come to mind is the positivist theory of international law, or the auto limitation theory of international law, or the consent theory of international law. Please keep in mind the previous portions we have already taken. Those theories please keep in mind. When I say the method or procedure by which rules of international law is determined or identified, what should come to mind is the natural law theory of international law. Okay, so what can you give, rather than asking you to give an example due to the paucity of time, I will state it myself. That is an example of a law that is international law that is created. An example that would be any convention. Any convention, sorry, not any convention. Let me say the WTO. Okay, the international convention that has created the WTO, World Trade Organization, the international convention that has created the United Nations Organization. These are the international laws that are created. Okay. What about international law that is determined or identified? These international law includes customary practices which are followed by nation states, that we will be discussing very soon. And a basic example would be the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they are natural rights, universally present, inherent and inalienable within each and every human being. So this inherent inalienable human rights are discovered or determined through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by each and every nation. So this is an example. So this is the accurate definition of sources of international law given by Herbert Briggs. Please.
Good morning, Sandeep. Safiane.
Yes, sir.
Sandeep, slide visible alla.
Okay. Students, can you confirm whether the slides are visible or not, or it is a problem that is only faced by Safi sir?
It's not visible, sir.
It's not visible, sir. It is not visible.
Oh, I see. Okay. 1 minute. എന്നാ പറഞ്ഞൂടായിരുന്നു. I see. 1 minute. Visible അല്ലായിരുന്നെങ്കിൽ പറയായിരുന്നു. Okay. If there is any issue, you can interrupt the class. Okay, no issue. You please tell me.
ഒരു കാര്യം കൂടെ, നമ്മുടെ ഇന്ന് വെബ് അഡ്മിൻ ആരൊക്കെയാ? സന്ദീപും പിന്നെ വേറെ ആരെങ്കിലും മാനേജ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ടോ വെബ് അഡ്മിൻ?
ഞാനിപ്പോ ഒരാളെ ഡെലിഗേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ
സാറേ, ബിന്ദു ചേച്ചി ഇപ്പൊ കേറുമെന്ന് പറയാം.
ഞാനിപ്പോ ജോയിൻ ആയി സർ, ഞാൻ അക്സെപ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യാം.
ഓക്കെ. Right.
Okay, now let me begin. Okay, Herbert Briggs, Law of Nations, 1952. Please remember this. Now, coming back to the another definition of sources of law given by Oppenheimer, Public International Law, in his literature, Public International Law, which we have discussed earlier in our class when we discussed about definitions. So according to him, the sources of international law, the sources from which legal rules derive its validity under international law, they include international customs and conventions. Okay, so Oppenheimer has also given an attempt, but the definition given by Herbert Briggs is more suitable. Okay. Oppenheimer has also given a definition of sources of international law. Please note it. According to him, the sources from which legal rules derive its validity is known as sources of international law. Under international law, they include international customs and conventions. But there are other sources of international law which have been identified, acknowledged, that we will discuss in the coming today itself, not in the coming class, but today itself. Okay. So there is a particular international legal document which tries to acknowledge the different sources of international law. Please remember, it does not recognize all the sources, but there are sources. In other words, there are sources that is not recognized by this particular international document. Okay, that I will tell you. This particular international document is none other than the document of that constitutes the International Court of Justice. Okay, that is the Statute of International Court of Justice. If you look into Article 38, Clause 1 of the Statute of International Court of Justice, it tries to acknowledge. It tries to acknowledge 4 sources of international law. Okay. So the 4 sources of international law is mentioned under Article 38, Clause 1, from A to D. Okay. So we will go through them one by one. First source of international law that is mentioned under Article 38, Clause 1 of the ICJ Statute is the international conventions. Okay. The international conventions, whether general or particular, international conventions, whether general or particular, establishing rules expressly recognized by the contesting states. Okay, contesting states mean the states which appear before the court to settle a dispute. Okay, we have already discussed in the previous class that the ICJ or the International Court of Justice is established under the UN Charter. Through the Statute of International Court of Justice is part of the UN Charter, and the purpose of the Statute of International Court of Justice is to settle any dispute among member states of the United Nations through peaceful means. Okay, so if anyone comes before the ICJ through Article 59 of the ICJ Statute, the ICJ will try to settle those disputes with regard to international law by analyzing the different sources of international law. For that purpose, the ICJ Statute has recognized mainly four sources of international law, expressly recognized. Okay, there are sources of international law that is expressly recognized under Article 38, Clause 1. And there are also sources which are impliedly recognized, that I will try explain in the coming slides. Okay, so the first one is international convention. If any state or any one of the states approach the ICJ or the International Court of Justice with any particular dispute with regard to enforcement or interpretation of an international law, the first source the ICJ may rely, one of the source, not the first, please remember, one of the source the ICJ may rely is international conventions. And within the Article 38, Clause 1, Clause A, international conventions are classified into 2, general or particular. Okay, there are international conventions which are general, and there are also international conventions which are particular. Okay, particular and general, what do you mean by that? In other words, there are international conventions which are applicable to all nations. Okay, and there are international conventions which are applicable only to parties to that particular international convention. Okay, so international conventions which are applicable to all, they are known as law-making treaty. Okay, they are known as law-making treaty, which we will discuss in the coming slides. And international conventions which are particular, they are known as bilateral treaties. Okay, the international conventions which are particular, they are otherwise known as bilateral treaty. In bilateral treaties, they are also known as commercial treaties. Okay, commercial treaties. These treaties are created not for the purpose of creating international law, but for the purpose of creating commercial relations. Okay, For example, there is an agreement between United States and India with regard to nuclear energy, sharing of uranium. Okay, there is a famous agreement. That agreement is known as the 123 agreement. Okay, this bilateral agreement was signed between the former president of the United States, Bush, and the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in 2012, where both the countries agreed on the terms and conditions for utilizing enriched uranium that will be exported from United States to India. Okay, so that particular bilateral agreement, it is also a treaty, and this particular agreement is between India and the United States, and it is for a commercial purpose. And a classical example of a lawmaking treaty is the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. It's a classical example. The United Nations Charter is a classical example of a lawmaking treaty. Okay, all these treaties are applicable to all nations, whether they are party to the international convention or not. Okay, so please keep in mind that particular source of international law. That is what is meant by international conventions, general or particular. Okay, now moving on to another source of international law that is recognized by the ICJ under the ICJ Statute Article 38, that comes under clause B, that is international custom. Okay, the wording that is used is international custom as evidence of general practice accepted as law. Okay, accepted as law, as subsidiary means for determining the rules of international law. Okay, so imagine there is no international convention to govern a particular dispute between nations. Okay, there is a situation. Okay, then if there is no international conventions, codified international conventions with regard to a particular dispute, a classical example of such a dispute is any international dispute with regard to monetary sovereignty. Okay, there is a concept known as monetary sovereignty, or you take, for example, bitcoins. Okay, if any if two states have any dispute with regard to bitcoins, or monetary sovereignty for that matter, there is no international convention. The ICJ has to rely on international customs, evidence as general practice. There is a general international conventions are generally practiced and accepted as law. So there are two elements to international custom, according to Article 38, Clause 1, Clause B. That is, international. In order to have an international custom, there must be a general practice among states, and this general practice must be accepted as law. Okay, so there is a Latin word for acceptance of a general practice as law. It is known as opinio juris. Okay, when these two elements comes together, it is known as international custom. Now, the next important source that is recognized by the ICJ under Article 38, Clause 1 is the general principles of law mentioned under Clause C. General principles of law recognized by civilized nations. So these are principles that exist in the municipal laws of each and every state. Okay, these are principles universally accepted within the municipal laws of each and every state. A classical example is res subjudice. The general principles of res subjudice. What do you mean by res subjudice? There is a provision under the CPC section 11 CPC, which says that once a decision has been made by a court on a particular subject matter, the same subject matter cannot be adjudicated by another court of a similar jurisdiction. Okay, that is res sub judice. And the res sub judice, this principle of res sub judice is recognized by all nation, by the municipal laws of all nation states. Okay, then the vitiating elements of contract, that which you may have studied, which you may have studied in the classes for law of contract, the vitiating elements of contract. A contract without consent is void. Okay, void ab initio. That is a general principle that is accepted across the municipal laws of all countries, whether it is India, whether it is Pakistan, whether it is Saudi Arabia, whether it is the United States, whether it is China. All these countries have different legal systems, but all of them recognize the same principle. So these are common principles. They are common general principles recognized by all states within their municipal law, and these sources are also relied by the ICJ to determine or to adjudicate upon any dispute with regard to international law, which may be brought before it by member states of the United Nations. Okay. Then, subject to the provisions of Article 59, judicial decisions and the teachings of most highly qualified publicists of various nations can also be recognized as a source of international law. Okay, but in other words, the literature, any literature that tries to identify or create a principle, any literature, not a convention, not a customary practice, but literature, any literature on international law, which tries to fill a gap that is left by general principles of international law or international custom or international conventions, they can also be sources of international law. For example, imagine, let me give you an example. Again, bitcoins artificial intelligence. Iduvare ICJ, as of now, no dispute has been brought before ICJ with regard to artificial intelligence. Okay, or with regard to bitcoins. So it is an unprecedented concept that has never been brought before the ICJ, and there is no general principles of law to govern artificial intelligence. There is no international custom as of now to govern artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is a very exclusive technology which is still emerging, and there is also no international conventions as of now to regulate artificial intelligence. Okay, so the court may have to rely on literature about artificial intelligence in order to settle any possible dispute in the near future between nation states with regard to use of artificial intelligence. Okay, so that is an example that I can give you of an event where the ICJ may rely on literature or teachings of public international law. These literature may come from judicial decisions. These literatures may come from academic work done by jurists in public international law. Okay. Now, these sources may also be used, these literatures may also be used as complementary to general principles of law or international customs or international conventions. Okay. All these sources can be used complementary to each other. Okay. Now, what is Article 59? So Article 59, the final source with regard to literature is that Article 59, that is, it should be the use of literature in public international law as a source of international law must be subject to Article 59. So what is Article 59 trying to say? The decision of the court has no binding force except between parties in respect of that particular case. Okay. In other words, the ICJ does not recognize precedents. Precedents are not recognized by ICJ. Okay. Precedent is a general principles. It is a general principle which exists among nation states, but the same principle of precedents are not recognized by ICJ, which is expressly provided under Article 59. So without infringing upon this Article 59, the literature of public international law can be used as sources of international law. Okay. Now, the next question is whether there exists a hierarchy among sources of international law. So, as you can see, we can see the different sources of international law is listed in Article 38. First, what is mentioned is international conventions, and second one is international custom. Third one is general principles, and the fourth one is literatures. Okay, judicial decisions, teachings, literatures on public international law. So the question is whether there is a hierarchy of sources, whether international convention is more important than international custom, or whether international custom is more important than general principles of law recognized by civilized nations, or whether general principles of law recognized by civilized nations are more important than judicial decisions and teachings or literatures of public international law. Okay, this is the question, and the answer is in the negative. There is no hierarchy. Okay, none of the sources are more superior than the other. Okay, each sources are equal, are treated equally. Every sources of international law are equally important. None of the sources are more important than the other. Okay, this has been clarified by the International Court of Justice in the military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua. Okay, the official title of the case is Nicaragua versus United States of America, and this is mentioned in the merit part of the decision. Okay, the ICJ report 1986. Okay, so please remember the question whether the different sources of whether there is a hierarchy within the different sources of international law. To that question, the ICJ has stated that there is no hierarchy. Okay, each and every sources are equally important. Okay, so I have briefly mentioned the facts of the case. I will share the slide with you. You please go through the facts of the case. Okay, for the time being, I will not be articulating what are the facts of the case, but nevertheless, we will discuss the facts of this particular case in the coming classes. For the time being, you please read it when I share it with you. So moving on, the facts of the case are mentioned here. Moving on, so let us deal with the first. Let us deal with the classical sources of international law first. Okay, among the different sources of international law that is recognized by ICJ statute, expressly recognized. Okay. Among the expressly recognized sources of international law under the ICJ statute, under Article 38, the first source that we are going to discuss is the classical sources of international law. Okay, sources of international law is divided into modern sources of international law and classical sources of international law. And the classical sources of international law includes international customary practice, and general principles of law followed by civilized nations. Okay, so these two sources are known as classical sources of international law, and all the other remaining sources of international law expressly acknowledged by ICJ statute and also impliedly acknowledged by ICJ statute is known as the modern sources of international law. Okay, so international customs and the literature, so literature on public international law as a source of international law they are modern sources of international law. So classical sources of international law includes international customary practice and general principles of law followed by civilized nations. Okay. Among the classical sources of international law, we will first discuss international custom. Okay. International customary practice as a source of international law. Okay. The first thing that we are going to discuss, international customary practice as a source of international law. So we will start with the elements. What are the components or elements of international customary law or international custom as a source of law? What are the important elements in order to identify or in order to acknowledge a law as an international customary law? So there are two elements within an international customary law. The first element is state practice, which can be stated as an objective element. And the second element is opinio juris sive necessitatis. Okay, this is a Latin term. In short, it is known as opinio juris. Opinio juris sive necessitatis means opinion as to law or necessity. It is literally translated as opinion as to law or necessity. So there are two important components that I have already mentioned when I mentioned Article 38, Clause 1, Subclause A. That is, there are two elements of international customary practice. One is state practice. There should be a state practice generally general state practice. There should be a general state practice which is accepted as law. Okay. In other words, opinio juris. Okay, sive necessitatis. So state practice can be identified objectively, but opinion whether that particular state practice is considered as legally binding or not, it is very subjective. It depends on state to state. Okay, what constitutes a state practice is it is universally accepted. But what state practices are considered as legally binding, it is subjective from one state to another. That is why state practice is considered as an objective element of international customary law, and opinio juris is considered as a subjective element, because opinio juris, whether a particular state practice is considered as legally binding or not, changes from one state to another. Okay. That I will try to tell you, or I will try to explain. So what do you mean by state practice first? Let us discuss the first element of international custom. That is state practice. State practice as an element of customary practice. Okay. So this was discussed in the North Sea continental shelf case. State practice, according to this particular case, it includes actions and omissions. Okay, that is negative action and positive action. State practices includes negative action and positive action. So what are these negative action and positive action? What are the examples of a negative action and positive action? The example that was mentioned in the ICJ judgment is the diplomatic correspondence. Sorry. In the ICJ statute, in the case, in the judgment of the ICJ, in the case of North Continental Shelf case between Germany and Denmark and Netherlands, the court recognized that state practices includes positive actions and negative actions. So a classical example of a positive action is the customary practice. Rather than here, I have mentioned the negative action first. Okay, a customary practice of non-use of force in international relations. It is a classical example of a negative action. Okay, negative customary practice. Okay, yeah, here you are trying your level best not to use force in order to settle disputes, international disputes. there is a customary practice of non-use of force in international relations to settle international disputes. Okay, and this customary practice is recognized in the Kellogg-Briand Pact, or officially known as the General Treaty for Renunciation of War as an Instrument of National Policy, 1928. Okay, in the Kellogg-Briand Pact or the Paris Pact, all the nation states who are party to this particular treaty, they agreed that they will not use war as a means to settle international disputes. Okay, before this Kellogg-Briand Pact, all these countries followed it as a customary practice. Whenever there is a dispute, they will try to adjudicate, they will try to use negotiation, diplomatic negotiations to settle those disputes rather than going into war. This was a customary practice which was followed among the nation states who were party to the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And this customary practice was eventually codified into a international treaty. Okay, so the Kellogg-Briand Pact is a classical example of a negative customary practice, negative state practice, forming part of customary law. Okay, another example is another legal provision which recognizes the customary practice of non-use of force in international relations is Article 2, Clause 3 and Chapter 6 of the UN Charter. Okay, in Article 2, Clause 3 of the UN Charter, it says that if there is any dispute among member states, they shall desist from using force as a means to settle disputes. And in Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, it says that all the disputes among member states shall be settled by peaceful means. And the peaceful means under Chapter 6, the different peaceful means under Chapter 6 is mentioned under Article 33, where it recognizes negotiation, mediation, conciliation, good office. These are the different peaceful means of settling international disputes in international relations. Okay, so this is a negative customary practice. This is a classical example of a negative state action, negative state practice forming customary law. So what is the example for a positive state practice forming customary law? A classical example of a positive state action, action or omission, is the customary principle of permissibility of use of force in case of self-defense. Okay, there is a customary practice for which there is a customary practice under international law which permits nation states to use force for self-defense. Okay, so this is a classical example of a positive state practice, and this is evidenced by Article 15 of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Article 15 I have already mentioned in the previous class when I was trying to discuss collective security. Under Article 15, if any nation states are attacked or are under threat of force, use of force, any member states of the Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization is under any threat of war or aggression towards its territory by any other state, all other member states of the NATO will come together and defend that particular nation. Okay, by using force for self-defense. And the same principle, customary practice of self-defense by permissible use of force is recognized under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. Okay, so it is a classical example of a positive state practice. That is one of the elements of customary law. Okay, state practice. We are discussing about state practice. Now the next question is whether only state actions form state practice, or whether statements made by nation states can also form part of state practice. Okay. In the previous examples, what I have mentioned is any actions. What about any statements? Any statements made by nation states? Whether any statements made by nation states also form part of international customary practice. Okay, any word, any statements. Okay. To this particular question, that a state practice only consists of state practice only consists of what states do and not what they say. Okay, the question is whether state practice only consists of what the states do or they do not do, and not what they say. What about the statements made by officials of the state? Okay. With regard to this question, the International Court of Justice in the fisheries jurisdiction case, or the case between United Kingdom and Iceland, the ICJ held that any statement made by the state in the form of claims can also be treated as evidence of state practice. Okay, it is not necessary that a state should conduct a positive action or a negative action. It will be sufficient enough for a state to make a claim or a statement or a wording by any officials of the state, through a diplomat or through the president or through the prime minister or through the legislatures. Any statement will be sufficient enough to evidence a state practice forming part of international custom. Okay. In this case, when Iceland was consistently making claims through the government, through their diplomatic channels, that they have exclusive jurisdiction over a vast area of the sea near to their territory, which is beyond the limit recognized by an international customary international treaty. This particular international treaty is the Law of the Sea, 1982, and beyond the Law of the Sea, 1970. Not 1982, but I believe 1970. Law of the Sea, 1970, or the UN Clause 1, the Law of the Sea Convention we will be discussing in the coming classes. But for the time being, please understand, there was an international convention which limited the jurisdiction of a particular state to claim its natural resources on its territorial waters. But what Iceland did, Iceland claimed a territorial, a vast area of the territorial waters beyond the limit recognized by that particular convention. And this claim of Iceland was consistently made by the Icelandic government even before the particular international convention. Okay, so the Icelandic government did not made any actions. Okay, actually the Icelandic government did not cover all the territories that were claimed by the Icelandic government, but they consistently made statements, oral statements, and statements saying that they claim over a vast area of the ocean for a significant period of time. And this claim or the oral statement made by state officials were considered as evidence of a customary practice. It is not necessary for a state to do any positive or negative action. Okay, so statements can also be considered as state practice, evidence of state practice forming customary law. Okay, now the North Sea Continental Shelf case, the facts of the North Sea Continental Shelf case and the fisheries case, I will disclose the facts of the case in the slide itself. For the time being, I will not discuss the facts of the case here. Please read the facts of the case by yourself. Because of the paucity of time, I'm not mentioning the facts of the case. I'm not going into the facts of the case. Okay. So coming on to the next element of international custom, that is opinio juris. Okay, we have gone through state practice and we have understood that state practice includes positive actions as well as negative action. Along with positive actions and negative actions, the statements made by the states, statements whether oral or written, any statement which is oral or written made by the state are also state practice evidencing customary practice. Okay, so state practice alone is not enough. There is another element of international custom, that is opinio juris. Okay, so what is opinio juris? Opinio juris is the belief that a state practice is required by law. Okay, a particular state practice is required by law under international law. Okay, it is required under international law. So in the North Continental Shelf case, the ICJ held that not only must the acts concerned be settled practice. Okay, not only there should be a state practice, but that particular state practice must also be such that, or carried in such a way that it is believed to be an obligation under international law. Okay, not only there must be a state practice which is settled, but there must be a belief among the nation states who are doing such a state practice, whether it is positive or negative, whether it is any oral or written statement, such a state practice must be believed to be obligatory under international law. They must believe that it is obligatory under international law. That is the wording that was given by the ICJ in the North Sea Continental Shelf case. An example of international conventions, legal provisions within international conventions which evidence this opinio juris, this aspect of opinio juris, that is, there must be a belief that it is obligatory under international law. Okay, and an example would be Article 2 Clause 2 of the UN Charter. If you look into Article 2 Clause 2 of the UN Charter, you will see that all members, in order to ensure to all of them the rights and benefits resulting from the membership of the United Nations, shall fulfill in good faith. Okay, shall fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by them in accordance with the present charter. Okay, so member states, member nations of the United Nations, member states of the United Nations shall fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by them in accordance with the present charter. So here the parties to the UN Charter are accepting the obligations coming under the UN Charter as binding upon them. They are not mere state practice, but they also believe that the state practice that is the positive as well as the negative state practice called by the United Nations. I have already mentioned the positive state practice. A classical example of a positive state practice mandated by the UN Charter is the Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which calls for the members of the United Nations to come together in self-defense against a nation state who violates the UN Charter. Okay, to use force or economic coercions to preserve and protect international peace and security. That is Chapter 7. Chapter 7 calls for a positive action, while Chapter 6 calls for a negative action. Chapter 6 calls that you should not use force, but you should use peaceful means of settlement of peaceful means for settling disputes. You should not use force to settle disputes. Rather, you should use peace for settling dispute. It is a negative action mandated by the UN Charter. So both these negative and positive actions must be obliged by all member states in good faith. Okay, that is an evidence of opinio juris. Okay, now another example is Article 2 Clause 6 of the UN Charter. Under Article 2 Clause 6 of the UN Charter, it says The organization shall ensure that states which are not members of the United Nations act in accordance with the principle as far as necessary for the maintenance of international peace and security. Okay, so the UN Charter under Article 2 Clause 6 says that it is also obligatory upon member state nation states who are not members of the UN Charter to abide by the UN Charter. Again, opinio juris. Okay, this is again an opinio juris. That is a belief that members of the UN Charter are obliged to enforce the principles of the UN Charter upon nation states who are not members of the UN Charter. Okay, so it is obligatory. Okay, that is the term. It is believed that it is obligatory under international law. Okay, a particular state practice is obligatory under international law. It is believed that a particular state practice is obligatory under international law. That is opinio juris. Now, there is a small criticism of this point of view that only those state practice which are believed to be obligatory are considered as international custom. Along with those state practice which is believed to be obligatory, there are also rights. Okay, rights can also be for those state practices which are considered as a right can also be considered as opinio juris. A classical example is the continental shelf. You see, there is a part of the sea known as the continental shelf, which was claimed as the resources that was located in that particular continental shelf. Continental shelf, I will explain what is continental shelf, what are the salient features, I will explain in the coming class. For the time being, please understand, the concept of continental shelf was claimed as a right, not as an obligation, but as a right by the United States in 1950. Okay. The jurisdiction over continental shelf, which is a portion of the sea, high seas, adjacent to the territory of the United States, was claimed as a right, not as an obligation, but claimed as a right by the United Nations. Sorry, not United Nations, United States. Okay, the US government claimed a jurisdiction over continental shelf, which was not existing prior to that claim. Okay, the same goes for the fisheries jurisdiction case. That is the case between United Kingdom and Iceland. Iceland made a claim. Iceland did not believe that there is an obligation to limit its exercise of extraction of natural resources from its territorial waters within a particular limit, as mentioned under international convention. Iceland did not believe that it was bound to abide by an international convention which tries to limit its territorial sovereignty over its territorial water. Iceland claimed it as a right. It extended its territorial sovereignty to the sea more than what is recognized under an international convention. So it claimed as a right. So any claim of right made by any nation states can also be forming part of opinio juris. Not only a belief that a particular state practice is binding under international law. Okay, also claims or any claim of right can also be opinio juris. Okay. Now, so please keep in mind, in order for a custom, in order to recognize a source of law as international custom, there are two important elements that must be present simultaneously. If any one of them are absent, it cannot be considered as an international customary practice. Okay. There must be state practice. Along with the state practice, such a state practice must be recognized as opinio juris. Okay, state practice plus opinio juris is international custom. This is recognized by the ICJ in the SS Lotus case, as well as in its advisory opinion on nuclear weapons. Okay, in the SS Lotus case is a very famous case. Again, I will provide the facts of the case in the slide itself. I will not be going into the facts of the case. But in the SS Lotus case, the court held that a new rule of customary international law cannot be created unless both these elements are present. When the court here, it is not ICJ but the Permanent Court of International Justice. Please remember, the Permanent Court of International Justice held that a new rule of customary international law cannot be created unless both opinio juris and state practice exist together. A state practice alone is not enough. Okay, that is the judgment given by the Permanent Court of International Justice. Now, when it comes to the International Court of Justice, the International Court of Justice held that a rule cannot be created by opinio juris without actual practice. Okay, there must, along with opinio juris, there must also be actual practice. In other words, here in the advisory opinion on nuclear weapons, what happened was, you see, in 1996, the nation states were trying to negotiate for nuclear disarmament. Okay, they were trying to negotiate between the nation states who had nuclear weapons and the nation states who did not have nuclear weapons. They were trying to negotiate how they can reduce their nuclear weapons stockpile. Okay, and while their negotiations were going on, an advisory opinion was sought from the ICJ whether it is a peremptory norm of international law. The elimination of nuclear weapons is a peremptory norm of international law. To this question, the ICJ affirmed, stated in the affirmative. Along with that, it also stated that an opinion that the reduction of nuclear stockpile is part of international law alone is not enough. There must be a state practice. Okay, an opinion that the proliferation of nuclear weapons is a violation of international law alone is not enough. There must be negative or positive state action to support those opinions. Here, the ICJ was trying to criticize the negative action, the incumbency shown by United States and Russia. While the negotiations were going on for reduction of nuclear weapons, many states who had nuclear weapons, they were not willing to reduce. Okay, this included India, this included Israel, this included China. Who were trying to develop nuclear weapons, they were not willing to be part of the negotiation, even though they also acknowledged that nuclear weapons are also a danger to humanity. Even though they believed that is the case, there was no state practice, the tangible state practice to reduce nuclear weapons. So the court held that even though there is an opinio juris, there is no state practice, a positive action or negative action to reduce nuclear stockpiles. Okay, that is the facts of the case in the advisory opinion on nuclear weapons. So opinio juris alone is not enough. State practice alone is not enough. There must be state practice which is believed to be an obligation under international law, or which is claimed as a right under international law. When these two elements comes together, there is a valid international customary practice. Okay. So there are exceptions. Exception to the generally binding nature of customary international law. Okay, there are few exceptions. The first exception is the special and local customary law. Okay, the general rule is that when there is a general consistent practice among nation states or a state practice which is consistently followed by majority of nation states, it is binding on all nation states. Okay, if there is a customary practice that is generally followed by all nations, majority of the nation states consistently for a long period of time, it is binding on all. That is the general rule. Okay, to this general rule there is an exception, that is local custom. That is the concept of local custom. So there are certain customs that are only practiced among nations which are geographically located. Okay, there are certain customs that are exclusively existing among certain geographies or certain localities among nation states. A classical example is the customary practice of giving political asylum in diplomatic premises. Okay, under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, it is prohibited to use diplomatic premises for granting political asylum. Okay, diplomatic premises cannot be used for granting political asylum or any type of asylum. Asylum that is the general customary practice. Okay, to this there is an exception that is followed among South American countries. All the South American countries they provide political asylum within the diplomatic premises in foreign countries. Okay, for example, I hope you are aware of Julian Assange. Julian Assange, who is a very famous freelance journalist who established the WikiLeaks, and the WikiLeaks is very famous for leaking classified information of the US government relating to spying on their own citizens. The US government was spying on their own citizens and committing human rights violations in Afghanistan and many foreign countries in the name of combating terrorism. Okay, and this classified information was leaked by Julian Assange in the WikiLeaks, and while he was in United Kingdom, an extradition request was made by the United States towards the United Kingdom, and in order to, before the US the police officers of the law enforcement agency in the United Kingdom could apprehend Julian Assange, he sought political asylum in the Peruvian embassy that was located in London. Okay, Peru is a South American country, and Julian Assange sought for political asylum in the Peruvian embassy located in London, in United Kingdom. Peruvian government granted him political asylum because it is a local custom to provide political asylum within the diplomatic premises of South American countries. Okay, if you come to the Indian embassy or any other embassies of a non-South American country, you will not be granted political asylum, because under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, granting of political asylum is prohibited, but as a local custom it is followed by South American countries, and this was acknowledged in the asylum case between Colombia and Peru that was filed before ICJ. Okay, then another exception to the general principle of custom is the persistent objector doctrine. There is a doctrine known as the persistent objector doctrine that was recognized by the International Court of Justice in the United Kingdom versus Norway case, otherwise known as the Fisheries case. So in this case, the ICJ recognized that if a state persistently object to a general customary practice. Okay, from its very inception. You see, when many of the countries accepted 12 nautical miles from the territorial waters to the high sea as the territorial sea, when that particular customary practice emerged, Norway from the very beginning of that particular customary practice was objecting. And the Norwegian government stated orally as well as in writing that they will claim up more than 12 nautical miles as their territorial waters. Okay, this Norway was persistently objecting to the customary practice of claiming territorial waters up to 12 nautical miles. Norwegian government claimed up to 20 nautical miles, and they consistently claimed territorial waters up to 20 nautical miles from the very inception of a customary practice of claiming territorial waters up to 12 nautical miles. Okay, 1 nautical mile is equal to 1.8 kilometers. Okay, please keep in mind. So if a country is persistently objecting to a customary practice from its very inception, that objection will stand. Okay, that objection will stand over that general customary practice. So there is two exception to the general principles of customary practice as a source of law under international law, and that is local custom or special custom and the persistent objector doctrine. Okay. So I have also disclosed the facts of the. I will disclose the facts of the case in the slide itself. Please go through the facts of the case. Today, I believe I have taken only the first source of law. My deepest apologies, but I believe I need to be this much specific so you can address the MCQ question. Okay, I am trying to be as specific as I can because each of these small elements will come as an option MCQ question. Okay, so there will be an MCQ question asking you what are the essential elements of a customary practice. Okay, option A will be state practice. Option B will be a belief that a particular action is a state practice. And a third option will be state practice and opinio juris. A fourth option can be only statements, only statements made by nation states. Okay, these can be options that may come up, and you have to select the right option. And the right option is state practice and opinio juris. And the option will also, a question will also come whether only state actions are part of state practice, or whether statements made by nation states orally and in writing are also part of state practice. Okay, that is assertion and reasoning. There is a question format. There is a question format known as assertion and reasoning. Assertion, not assertion and reasoning, but they will give you two options, A and B. That is state practice, negative and positive actions. Okay, negative and positive actions are state practice. Okay, that is A. And the second part, B, will be only statements made by nation states in writing as well as in oral. They are state practice. Okay, and the options will be A is true, or second option will be B is true. Third option will be A and B is true. Okay, or the final option will be none of the above. And the correct option will be both A and B is true. Okay, so unfortunately you have to be this much detailed, and I have taken almost 1 hour to explain the first source of international law. And in the next class, we will go into the general principles of general principles recognized by civilized nations as a source of law. Okay, which is part of the classical sources of law. Once we finish the classical sources of law, we will move on to the modern sources of law. We will start with international treaties. We will discuss what are the different types of international treaties. Then the next source of international law is literature, judgments, how they become sources of international law. What are the other emerging sources of international law? All these, hopefully, we can discuss in the next class. Okay. So everyone, thank you for your time, and I will end my class here. I think I have taken additional time also. So if anyone have any question, they may ask, or if there is no questions, we can end the class.
Sandeep, one question.
Runsi? Yes. 1 minute.
Sandeep,
I will put my headset because you are not audible. 1 minute.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, Runsi.
Sandeep, you were talking about the Colombia versus Peru case, asylum case 1950.
Yeah.
Was the violation of Vienna Convention happened in that case? Because the Vienna Convention says that it came up in 1961 only.
Sorry. The Vienna Convention is a codification of all the customary practices with regard to diplomacy. Okay. It doesn't mean that this particular prohibition was not there. Basically, the Vienna Convention is a codification of all the customary practices with regard to diplomacy. And this particular case, that is the asylum case, came before the Vienna Convention. That is correct. What Runsi has stated is correct. The asylum case came before the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties. Sorry, not law of treaties, but the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. But you see, there was a customary practice of not entertaining political asylums within diplomatic premises, because providing political asylum in diplomatic premises may undermine diplomacy. Okay, you see, diplomatic relations are based on trust. A trust that the diplomatic premises will not be used against the interest of nation states who are accommodating them. Okay. Let me give you an example. You see, providing political asylum by Peru. I have given you Julian Assange as an example. Okay, when Peruvian government decides to give political asylum to Julian Assange in the Peruvian embassy, what the Peruvian diplomats are trying to do is they are trying to violate the trust of the British government. Okay, by providing political asylum to Julian Assange, they are trying. The Peruvian government is trying to act against the interest of the UK government. Okay, the primary objective of diplomatic relations is to maintain the mutual interest of a country, mutual interest of both the foreign state and the state which is accommodating those diplomats. Okay, the primary objective of a Peruvian diplomat is to secure both the interest of United Kingdom and the Peruvian government. By providing political asylum to Julian Assange, what the Peruvian government has done is they have violated the interest of UK government. They have violated their duty as diplomats. When Peruvian government is providing political asylum to Julian Assange in Peruvian embassy. Julian Assange was given political asylum in the Peruvian embassy of in the UK Peruvian embassy for around 10 years. Okay, for around 10 years, Julian Assange spent his life inside a small room inside the Peruvian embassy. The Peruvian embassy is a very small building, and for this reason only, as a general customary practice, political asylum is not given in diplomatic premises, because the primary purpose of diplomacy is to secure the interest of both nations. The nation state is the nation state which has sent the diplomats, and the nation state which has received the diplomats. Both of them are trying to secure their mutual interest. But in the case of granting political asylum, one state is trying to infringe upon the national interest of another state. That is why this is prohibited. But due to the political environment that exists in South America, this particular general customary practice was given an exemption. Many of you may not be aware of the political history of South America, because after the Second World War, when there was the Cold War between the Soviet bloc and the Western Allies. Okay, so United States and the Soviet Union was trying to curtail the spread of ideologies of both of their ideology. United States was trying to curtail the spread of communism around the world, and that was the primary objective, because United States and the Western Allies considered communism as an evil ideology which needs to be curtailed within the borders of the Soviet Union. And as part of its endeavor, United States interfered in the elections of democratic elections of most of the South American countries. Okay, and when they interfered, what they did was they undermined many of the political parties which came to power. Many of the communist parties in South America which came to power by democratic means. Okay. They were persecuted by military forces within those South American countries, supported by the United States. So basically, what happened was many of these communist parties, which were legitimately elected into power through democracy, they became political refugees within their own country. And many of the times, these countries, these communist parties relied on their fellow South American countries where there was a communist party. Okay, for example, in this particular case, in the asylum case, Peru versus I cannot remember the 1 minute. Colombia versus Peru in this particular case. Okay, what happened was there was a political refugee. He was trying to. He was a communist. He was a member of a communist party, and he was trying to flee after assassinating a military dictator supported by the United States. Okay, he assassinated a military dictator who was supported by the United States government. He was part of a communist party in Colombia. Okay, so after assassinating a military dictator of Colombia, this particular Colombian citizen who is a communist sought political asylum in Peru, in the Peruvian embassy of Colombia. The Peruvian government was run by a communist party. Okay, so they both of them are fellow communists. So as a gesture of protecting a fellow communist, the Peruvian government granted political asylum. So many countries who were communist countries were forced to give political asylums to their fellow communists in military dictatorship states of around the world, supported by the United States. This was a particular political environment that existed during the Cold War in South America, which forced many, especially many communist South American states to give political asylum to their fellow communists in many states around the world. Okay. Otherwise, if they don't provide political asylum to their fellow communists, most probably they will be killed by the political dictatorship or assassinated. Their basic human rights will be violated. many of the times these political asylum refugees, they don't have the time or opportunity to go through a formal system. Okay, as they are hunted all the time by the dictatorship or their enemies, supported by the United States. Okay, so this local custom emerged out of necessity, even though it is a violation of the general custom of diplomacy. This local custom of providing political asylum in diplomatic premises emerged as a necessity because the Communist Party, many of the communist political parties which came into power democratically within South American countries were undermined by the United States. They were being hunted by the United States. And in order to save them from this political persecution, many of the communist countries who had embassies in these military dictatorships under the United States gave political asylum to their fellow communists within those diplomatic premises. That is the history. In order to understand each of there are also other local customs. And behind each local custom, there is a history. There is also a history behind the local custom that was recognized under the fisheries case. Okay. Due to the paucity of time, I cannot explain. I believe these histories will not be coming as a question in the UGC net. Okay, so you don't have to worry. I have elaborated on it because Ronsi has asked those questions. Okay, so I hope I have answered the question.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay,
Yes, Sandeep. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Is there any other questions?
The floor is open for doubts. You can raise it now.
ഞാൻ ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് പറയുന്നതിൽ ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുണ്ടോ എന്ന് നിങ്ങൾ പറയണം. ഞാനൊരു ഫീഡ്ബാക്ക് ഫോം ഞാൻ ഇന്ന് തരാം കേട്ടോ. I will be sharing a feedback form after the end of this class. Please give me a feedback. I believe many of you may be having a difficulty understanding my English. But I believe it is in the interest of each and every one of you that I speak in English. So I can motivate many of you to take classes in English because, as per law, the medium of instruction in our legal education institutions are English. And for that purpose only, I'm taking in English, okay? It's not that I'm not interested in Malayalam. Thinking it in Malayalam, I'm doing it in consciously, and I think it hopefully it will motivate you rather than discourage you. I hope my English is understandable. I hope to get your feedback nevertheless. I will share the Google form. Please kindly give your feedback if there is any. Okay. So is there any doubt, any questions? If there is no question, I think there are no questions. So we can end the class. Thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir, for the enlightening session. To the kind reminder of all the other participants,